Okay, welcome to another episode of NAMAE's interviews with personalities from media arts education. And today we want to welcome Travis McKenzie, all the way from Australia. Uh, Travis is Australian, he's a teacher of art, English, and media, and he's chair of the Australian Teachers of Media Victorian Education Committee. So really honored and pleased to have you, Travis. Thank you for spending some time with us. Welcome.
No, thank you, Dane. I'm excited to be here. It's such a momentous time in history and world events, and media is at the heart of it. So I'm really happy to be talking about this stuff, which is probably more relevant than it's ever been. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll try to keep this within the time.
Yeah.
There's so much to talk about. So
Too much.
great to hear from Australia, what's going on there. It's always great to hear that media arts is having progress somewhere, and
Mm.
Australia really kind of sets the bar for media arts education, I think. And so it is an honor to hear from you, and I think it's going to be very interesting to our audience. Can you tell us a little bit about your background, starting with your childhood, perhaps, and your early experiences with media that maybe led to you becoming a media arts teacher?
Well, I grew up in rural Victoria, so think of it sort of like farming area. Yeah. So back down in the country, there was lots of cows and trees. And as a sort of a Gen Xer of the 80s, I grew up with all the classics. We had the best movies. I still say it to my students. We had the best films of all time. I think that period between 1980 and the end of 1990, maybe the early 2000s too, we had a sweet spot there for film. And I sort of grew up with those classics, and it sort of really impacted me a lot growing up. All the classics, Raiders of the Lost Ark and Star Wars and all that stuff. And that really opened my imagination, and kind of drew me into science fiction and fantasy. And I think a lot of people, in my position, in the country, kind of had that escapism through that kind of fictional film world, and that really resonated. Also, gaming as well. I was one of the first generations that had home video games, and I got obsessed. I had one of the very earliest Apple IIe computers, and got into things like coding games and things way back at the very start of it. So I sort of had a weird upbringing, I guess, in the country with lots of cows, but at the same time, high tech stuff at home, and sort of that interplay between those two worlds was probably what formed my passion for all things media. And then that led on to me, getting into teaching, and after a creative arts sort of education. So I sort of mucked around with a lot of stuff and had a bit of a play in film industry as a special effects creator. And then yeah, went into teaching as an arts teacher mainly.
Okay, great. So, where did you start teaching, and what were you teaching?
So I escaped the country for the city. So I moved to Melbourne for university. And when I had finished my creative arts degree, I did a lot of workshop stuff with the local community, making some art projects, and happened to meet a teacher at a sort of a local, fairly big inner city school. And I'd never really considered teaching at all until that point. But this teacher was just this great mentor, and I really got along with him. And he was just like, "You should really think about this. You've got a way with kids, and you seem to have a good way of working with groups." And so I went back and did my teaching degree, and I actually got a job at that school that I'd sort of volunteered for, doing some of these community art projects, and that was it. And that was 24 years ago. So I've moved around a lot. I've taught in London. I've taught in different schools in Melbourne. I'm now in a senior secondary campus, so just the higher 2-year level. So we call it year 11 and 12 here. So it's the last 2 years of high school. And I'm sort of teaching at a college now that just does those years. And I'm the head of arts there. So I sort of manage the arts and media classes that we run here. Yeah.
So for 24 years again, and you've been teaching basically video production, filmmaking, combination of those, anything else?
Combo. So the media arts curriculum in Australia is actually pretty good, in Victoria in particular. So when I started out, I was just arts and a bit of English as well. So my main focus was in ceramics, believe it or not, and English and creative writing. But I worked at a school that had just started teaching media, and they were saying, well, who can teach this, right? Because it's one of those things, and typically it gets given to an English teacher because they do teach film as text in English. So I had done a bit of that. But I'd also did some undergraduate studies in film studies and film history as well. And like I said, I had a bit of experience in the film industry doing some special effects for student films and things like that. So I had a go, and I put my hand up for it, and I loved it straight away. Media teaching was just that perfect meeting of my creative abilities and the analytical stuff that I love doing in English. And I never looked back. So once I started teaching that, that was, about 19 years ago, it became my sort of main focus as a teacher, and then it also took off in Victoria as well, where more and more schools started bringing in media curriculum into their senior campuses, just because it was a popular subject that kids wanted to do, for the reasons that you just mentioned. Now, film production is always the big draw card. Kids want to make films, but a big part of our curriculum is about analyzing the media, and so we have a lot of students that come to it with that desire to be critical about the things that they consume, and that to me has become one of my main focuses.
Okay. And then, so when you're teaching film, what's your approach in general? It seems you combine both analysis and production. Um, what are students doing generally? Is there a plan in terms of a specific project is first, second, and what's the progress of students through your course?
Yeah, well, in the early days, we kind of separated it, right? We'd have practical classes and theoretical classes, but in my mind, that doesn't make any sense. The two go hand in hand. And if you think about what we get kids or people do in industry, right? If you're coming up with a big project, the first thing you're going to do is go through a whole development phase where you're going to research existing things, and you're going to understand the messages that they communicate and the audiences that they're for. And so I saw that as a kind of thing we should be emulating in the classroom. So pretty early on, I started to essentially merge the two together. And as students come into my class, they'll start doing some research and development. We analyze existing films, and I typically get them to do a video essay around this. So forgetting about old forms of assessment with written work, it's always been to me about that medium is the message idea, that if you're going to analyze film or video or any kind of media, you should probably use the very medium itself to have that discussion. And so my students even in year 7, so we're talking 11 and 12-year-old 13-year-old kids, they come in and they learn video production through analyzing existing texts, and that becomes a very structured way of showing me that they know the codes and conventions of cinema, and then we build from there. Yeah.
Are there particular themes or genres that they um, begin with, or is it the same genre throughout?
Yeah, so I love talking about genre. I mean, we have a fairly good and robust curriculum that breaks down, I think, the different aspects of media. And so when I talk about genre, we're really talking about conventions. And so I come at film studies or media studies from this idea of conventions. And there are conventions of media forms. That's the way certain mediums are made. So the types of technology, the types of distribution platforms that a particular product will have. But then there are narrative conventions, and they're universal. So they're the basic building blocks of a good story. And then you have genre conventions that sit above both. And genre conventions, I teach anyway, are really just an expectation. It's a promise to the audience. If you think about what a genre is, like horror, you're promising a certain emotional and cognitive response. A promise to the audience of what you can expect to think and feel. And so when we have that sort of breakdown of those three categories of conventions, the stories, the medium, and the genre, then students start to see how they can play with all these different pieces to essentially construct anything. So I don't limit myself to one genre. I look at everything. And in fact, I give students a lot of choice. So if I set a video essay task, it'll always be based on what they are interested in, right? So you pick the things that you love and show me how you can break that down. And that really gets that engagement and student agency. Mm.
So the video essay is a critical piece of this. I've heard you talk about that previously, and it's a genre that's known throughout the country. Is that correct?
That's right. So initially, me and a few other teachers just did it on our own, right? We have a bit of freedom in our curriculum in Australia where we have an outcome statement, but we don't have it defined in terms of what that has to be like. So I was playing with this back in 2016 when the tech finally got good enough on laptops that students essentially could all do this, right? They had access to something, a video editor, and there wasn't that hurdle of tech that was getting in the way. So yeah, 2016, I started working in this place, and it's sort of just in that synchronicity way, a lot of us who were doing it kind of started to get it together and compare notes and realize that we're all sort of doing the same thing. This essentially then led to the Curriculum Authority in Victoria adopting video essays as a formal mode of assessment for the senior curriculum. And the very senior curriculum does have some limitations on the mode of assessments. And until then, it hadn't been mentioned as a thing you could do. And now in the new what we call study design, which defines what a VCE subject should be, we have video essays as an actual mandated assessment strategy, which is a really great thing, which means now every student in the senior level has to do this as part of their curriculum.
And the video essay, the topics of that is media.
Yeah, we focus in senior VCE on narrative, the narrative aspects of media. So we typically look at a film study and talk about its context and its meaning. But in the junior levels, the topic's open. So a lot of people now do video essays on things like agency and control or media and change, the way that the shifting landscape of media is affecting society. And so you can pretty much do any topic. In fact, I even bring it back into my arts classes now too. And some of my visual arts students do video essays on their favorite artist. It's a mode that I think this current generation of students just intrinsically understand and enjoy working in. Yeah.
And that particular project can come into competitions, as I understand it from our previous conversation, as it's kind of a big deal in Australia, or is it in Victoria
Oh,
specifically?
Victoria mostly. Look, every other state have different set curriculum. So it's only in Victoria that students are mandated to do one in their top level classes. And part of my job as the chair of the ADAM Education Committee, which oversees, teacher professional development for media teachers, is we're trying to get up a student competition or at least a showcase event for video essays, and that's something that we're hoping to have up next year. Just to celebrate the kind of work the kids do, because it's quite amazing. I mean, the thing about video essays that really to me seals it as a good thing is when you see students wanting to watch back the work that they've done and sharing it with each other. You never get kids sharing essays. It's never happened, at least in my experience. But they will actually show each other and their parents even, hey, look at this video essay I made about this film we studied, and they're good productions in their own right.
Oh, very good. I wanted to go over some history of media arts and media education in Australia. Just read a few facts here. This will give us some context, and then perhaps you could add to that and then build on that. But the history of media literacy in particular goes way back in Australia. Uh, Major event in 1927, the Australian Royal Commission into the moving picture industry conducted a thorough investigation into the role and impact of cinema on children's education and social lives. If we jump forward to the 60s, the film appreciation and production was developed in Australia's southern states, and media texts were often used in English classes from about the middle years of primary school. The
Mhm.
Australian Teachers of Film Appreciation later retitled the Australian Teachers of Media, ADAM, which you're a chair of that committee, played a significant role in promoting film analysis and production. And then, due largely to ADAM's advocacy, the media curriculum was eventually integrated into the national curriculum in 2014, which was unique internationally, emphasizing both media production and analysis for children aged 5 to 15. This was based on existing state curricula, so this is already going on, but it was formalized right at the national level. And according to a national study in 2016, the majority of students reported being requested to create a short video in non-media courses, particularly in secondary schools. So
Hmm.
just confirming that's all correct. And
Yep.
now in today's situation, how would you describe the organization of media literacy and media arts in Australia?
Yeah, so we have now an established national curriculum for media literacy, and that's something that is governed by the Australian Curriculum Assessment Authority, or ACARA, and you can look up their website. They have quite an extensive mapped out curriculum from primary all the way through to year 10. And it's a really robust curriculum. It was only published this year as sort of an updated media arts curriculum, and it's quite comprehensive in that it indicates for every year level the kinds of ideas that they should be exploring and the kinds of work that they should be making. And that really gives both permission to teachers across the whole country to explore this. And primary schools work a little differently, perhaps in Australia, in that you have classes that the teachers aren't necessarily specialists in every different curriculum area. And media in particular for a primary school is often something that's still taken by a generalist teacher, or someone perhaps with more English or literacy skills. And so what the ACARA curriculum does is it essentially gives teachers the content that they need to address some of these things that they might otherwise not talk about. And we're talking about sort of real critical literacy things, analyzing TV shows that are made for children, creating video work and media work in the primary room. So a lot of the exciting stuff that's happening in Australia is actually happening at a very junior level, because the kids just have the desire and the need and the tech to do it, and off they go. But at a senior level, we're still more bound by state curriculum authorities. So we have in Victoria the Victorian Curriculum Assessment Authority, and they have also a primary to year 10, as well as the important VCE curriculum. And that's a very comprehensive document called a study design that maps out a 2-year course of media arts education. And so we have a lot of very documented and very high-end kind of content that's accessible to anyone to have a look at.
And so the curriculum is fairly well mapped out, as you say, and so it's fairly detailed, and teachers are implementing that. And do they have a lot of variability in terms of how they actually
Yeah,
make that happen in
absolutely.
the classroom?
You know what? I mean, maybe actually, I might show you something too. I'm just going to share my
Mm-hmm.
screen, because I think the best way to tell you about it is to show you.
Mm-hmm.
What we're looking at here is the media arts curriculum in Victoria. And we're on a page here that sort of maps out the curriculum from all the different year levels. So F is what we call foundation, up to year 10. And so at the moment, I'm on a year 7 and 8, which is sort of the very first years of junior high, I guess you'd call it in America. And you can see here, there are really only 4 concepts that we talk about, or 4 categories. So exploring, developing practices, creating, and presenting. And if we look at each of these, they have these very general outcome statements.
Mm-hmm.
Investigate the ways media arts concepts are used to communicate ideas. But then we have these elaborations, and they then expand. I think maybe you can't see that. Can you still see my screen? It didn't do a pop-up, did it?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, great.
See it.
And you can see here it gives some examples of both the questions that students might ask, or the teacher might ask of them, as well as sort of an idea of the activities. Now, this is not as far as a lesson plan, so teachers still have the freedom to generate their own content any way they like. But it's specific enough that it really directs teachers into the kinds of things they should be doing with their students. And this goes all the way through to year 10, and it's a very, I think, mature document in that it looks at things that are at a current sort of level of media practice,
Mhm.
and it sets fairly high expectations of what the students should be able to produce, even at that junior level.
And so media literacy, or is it called media education specifically?
You
Uh,
just, I,
this would
yeah,
be
media.
would be conducted by the English teacher?
Well, no, at the junior level of high school, there's now enough trained media teachers as a speciality that most schools have someone in there who has an actual background in media education. And it's a fairly big part of university pre-service teacher education. So I also run workshops with a local university for their graduate teachers, where I work with media teacher graduates and go through a lot of this practice with them. So we train people up to enter the workforce with these very specific skill sets of media analysis and creation.
And so, media literacy and media arts are fairly well spread throughout the Australian curriculum, and particularly in Victoria.
Mhm. Yeah, no, absolutely. Victoria has probably led a lot of this. Not to say that the other states haven't also done a lot as well, but there's been a real push in Victoria. We have a lot of fairly big cultural kind of centres of things like we have a place called ACME, which is the Australian Centre of Moving Image, and that's a museum in the middle of Melbourne dedicated to the history of media in Australian industry. And they support a lot of these pushes to have events on and celebrate the media production and critical analysis of media as well. So yeah, we have a lot of teachers, a very active teacher group. Adam is a really interesting place. You know, a lot of teachers come in and share. I mean, media changes so much. That's the thing. It's not like English. You know, English teachers, you know, you've got your books and way of teaching it, and it sort of hasn't changed that much. But media changes every year, and we're constantly updating not only what we
Mm.
teach, but how we teach it.
So the film industry has had a huge influence on education, and they're still connecting with educators through this
Absolutely.
organization. So give me a little bit more about that relationship and how does it remain so strong?
Well, Adam in particular has a lot of work with directly with producers. So we help them produce study guides for their films. So when a film production is getting wrapped up, one of the things they'll do is reach out to us, and we'll work with them to develop study guides for their content that then are published on our shop. And what happens is, you know, we're a non-for-profit organization, and that gives these production companies a way to sort of bring content to the classroom related to their texts, and that's
Mhm.
been a really crucial part in that relationship. Yeah.
And so filmmakers are coming into the classroom and educators are going to this
Acme,
Adam.
yeah. Yeah, Acme. So it happens in different ways. Obviously, a lot of teachers reach out and get that industry participation. But there's a lot of events that happen at places like Acme where you can go and meet the filmmakers. And we run conferences all the time where you'll have workshops with actual industry professionals and you know, showing some of the latest ways of creating things. And so there's a really healthy sort of back and forth between industry and the classroom here, I feel. Yeah.
Mhm. And these courses in particular are very popular with these
Yeah.
high school students at the upper
Oh,
level.
absolutely. Probably one of the things I should probably mention is one of the things that the Victorian curriculum does really well is it celebrates student work. So for a while now, Victoria has had what's called the Season of Excellence. Think of this as like the Oscars for all creative subjects in the state. So all senior kids who are doing VCE in an arts subject, so that's design. We have a range of them. We have visual arts, of course. We have, you know, visual communication and design. We have product design. We run a lot of practical hands-on classes, and each one of them has a showcase event. And this is a statewide event. Every student has the ability to enter their work into for it to be considered to be part of a showcase event. And then they have a visual arts exhibition called Top Arts, and there's top designs, and then for media there's top screens, and that's where you have this film festival of the student work. Now, I don't underestimate how powerful it is to promote and celebrate student work at that state level, because every kid in the state, they see this, they see it advertised, they go along and see the next year's work being shown when they're starting high school, and they all have aspirations to get their work in there. And I think that's one of the reasons we have such a robust visual arts and creative arts curriculum in Victoria, because we celebrate it, you know, and that means so much to kids.
Wonderful.
Mm.
Um, And then media literacy, is so sort of interwoven into the curriculum in that sense. What do you feel the benefits have been for you in Australia in general for media literacy to be so prominent in the committee in the curriculum?
Yeah. I think curriculum documents are really important because they indicate the aspirations of teachers and where we want things to go. And I think these curriculum authorities have been great in getting groups of teachers in to consult about where we should be heading. And so for the VCE media curriculum in Australia, in Victoria, sorry, is incredible because we have an entire unit of work focused on the concept of agency and control, where we essentially address the big questions that are facing society. How is it that people in a democracy come to their informed decisions for elections? How does media influence that? And how do regulations of media get generated? What are the kind of the arms race between the kind of cowboy Wild West of media ecosystems, and then how we come back and go, hang on, what is actually doing to us as a culture? And so we've had that explicitly in our curriculum documents now for over a decade, and that has really shaped I think the sophistication of what we expect our students to be able to discuss. And I think it's had a positive effect in general on the state of our democracy. I like to think that all the students who come through VCE Media leave high school with a very solid foundation of critical media literacy. And I can only say that's a good thing.
Yeah, I have to say, I'm a bit envious of Australia, both in media arts, its prominence within the curriculum there, but also this media literacy element. We're here at November 3rd. We're going to be having our election on the 5th. And seems that about $2 billion has been spent in the last election cycle, just really inundating people with media. And we're even seeing really prolific use of misinformation. And you say disinformation is another term. Uh,
Yeah.
but people are being drenched with this, and I feel like we're just not, we don't have any proactive sort of preventative means to
Yeah.
deal with this. People are just inundated with it, and it perhaps, I assume, is influencing them.
Of course it is. I mean, look, firstly, I got to thank all of America for giving me content to teach. I've done my entire last year, half of my year has been
You're
essentially
welcome, Travis.
following following the media cycles in America, because it's such a great example of how things have changed, but also how things really haven't. I mean, humans have always been manipulating each other, right, to think certain ways. And I teach media literacy, sort of going back to the very, the dawn of time, right? This kind of mythical idea of the first people who ever used language, and what did they do? Well, half of them probably told each other good things like where to eat and where to avoid the saber-toothed tigers. And then the manipulating people in those groups probably went, well, you know what, eat that bush there, and it's good for you, and found a way to sort of knock off their rivals. And in a way, we haven't changed, right? That's what media is. It's the ability to convey good information, and meaning, but it's also the ability to deceive. And intellect has always played another arms race, which is, can you decode the lies in a timely enough manner to make an informed decision? And that's always been the most important thing we teach kids. That's how you become a citizen of a democracy.
And so, given the evolution of things, what's going on with AI in Australia, and what are
Yeah,
the
wow.
opinions of that, and how are you approaching that similarly and differently than media literacy?
Well, I mean, I think it is intricately linked. I don't think you can separate the two. Like I said before, I teach production skills alongside analytical skills, and AI sits at all levels of that. When I teach production, for instance, I've embraced AI. There's a lot of discourse at the moment about AI being the death of creativity, the death of human ingenuity. I don't have much time for that. The more I look at it, the more I do see it as a tool. Yes, it's a transformational tool, and it's going to be, interrupting so much of how we work and think. but it's also such an amazing gift to students. You know, it takes away that hurdle of technical know-how. I've got kids who come to me and they've got big ideas, right? Ideas bigger than they perhaps could even create, even with all the tech they might want. But what AI gives them is an inroad to that. They can kind of create and generate storyboards is a good example. You know, they'll come up with a script idea, they'll workshop it, and normally they get stuck then. You know, how do I jump from my idea to something on the screen? And AI I use as a lot of ideation where they'll now create storyboards, proper, really intricate storyboards that help them tell that story that they want visually. And that's been a huge boon for us as media educators. But you know, it doesn't come without risks, right? I talk a lot, and I've written recently about some of the discussion about AI being potentially dangerous for creativity, and it's hit me not as a personal creator, because I think growing up in the 80s, I went through that era of having to work it out, right? I was the one who programmed the VCR for my parents. I worked out how to, you know, put in a virus checker for my dad. I know how tech works. And I forget that for a student just coming into it, we need to be careful. And the analogy that I use, and I gave a talk on this recently, I like the idea, the message of Dumbo, right? Dumbo the elephant. You know, he was given a magic feather by the circus mouse, and that was, you know, the placebo or whatever that he needed to believe in himself as a creature that could fly. And we love that message, right? That idea. And then it's sort of what we do in schools. We kind of we call it here the gradual release of responsibility model, right? That we're essentially working alongside students until they're strong enough to carry on themselves. And with AI, though, I see it as a potential jetpack instead of a magic feather. And I think of what would happen in that movie if Dumbo had been given a jetpack. Yeah, he would have flown, but he would never have developed that intricate belief of himself as a flying creature. And I kind of think there's something there about AI. We've got to be careful with it, right? It can easily take over some of the students' sense of autonomy. And so, just like giving my daughter a sharp knife and teaching her how to cook, you want to do it under supervision, and you want to do it under very strict guidelines. This is what you do, and this is how you do it. Yeah, but I'm excited about it. I mean,
Yeah.
it's going to change everything. Mhm.
Yeah, that's a great description. I love that. We're about closing here, and I was wondering if you have any words of wisdom for us here. We have our new National Association for Media Arts in United States. We started in January. We're almost a year old, so and we are still just starting up. We have a lot of work to do to build out the discipline, and we have a very different situation in the United States than you do in Australia. There is, states are really independent to do what they want in terms of developing the curriculum and so forth. So it's going to be a difficult, I think,
Yeah.
task to make media arts and media literacy really happen in all states and across the country, really. It's going to be a longer endeavor. I think Australia really made a leap there. Do you have any words of wisdom or encouragement for why we should push this forward? And um, yeah, just anything in that regard to sort of support that and encourage that.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, obviously, go forward and conquer, right? You have to, right? It's the most important thing you can teach kids is critical media literacy. But more than that, you know, we think about how much change is coming into the education world, and it is, right? The AI is going to shake up everything. But what it won't shake up is the need for students to come out of a high school education with critical and creative capabilities. That's the most important thing, the ability to work critically and collaboratively with groups of people to solve problems. And media literacy and media creation is probably the best way of doing that, right? Kids want to analyze the films they watch. They want to analyze the TV, the social media. They are so hungry to have somebody help them make sense of that world. And so if you put that in the curriculum, not only are you going to be doing a good thing, but the kids are going to rush into those classes and they're going to be engaged in a way they just aren't in anything else they do. And then, you know, give them the ability and trust them to let them make whatever they want. And that's when they'll really surprise you, because kids have stories to tell. And if you teach them just the littlest bit of how to tell those stories, they're just going to run with it, and it becomes a really exciting thing. So yeah, you're doing the right thing. Keep pushing. Trust that the kids will take it and run with it.
Wonderful. Thank you for your wisdom here, Travis, and for everything that you shared today. Is awesome. Great information. So
Yeah,
hope
great
we can
chatting,
talk to
mate.
you again
Yeah,
soon.
please.
And
Always fun. Hopefully after this week, there's going to be a whole nother thing we can talk about.
oh yeah,
Positive.
we'll definitely check in with you later.
Yeah.
So thank you. Take
Good
care.
luck. Thanks, Dean. Thanks.